So I'm continuing my debate preparation. This is the second video where I've gone through this. My debate is tomorrow with the person you see in the picture, and I'm just gonna go through this real quickly. Um, so the last video that I made, basically I spent about for slide one, 3 minutes, slide two, 1 minute, slide three, 1 minute, and then the slide four, the content for was about 5 minutes. So I made some changes, and I'm not going to go through the same stuff I did at that point. Later on, once I get everything finalized, I might do a trial run so y'all can see how that sounds, and then you can actually see how it actually goes later on in the debate. But so yeah, here's all the stuff. Now this is where I made some changes, and so I'll be talking about this material right here. Um, Daniel Mira likes Hebrews 10. He thinks it's the basis for why you can lose salvation. And so I'm going to be arguing that it refers to physical death and the loss of blessing inheritance. The basis for this is understanding that Moses physically died in the Old Testament, even and he didn't get to go into the land. If you try to say that the promised land is a picture of heaven in the book of Hebrews, then that would mean that Moses didn't get to go to heaven. And so that's not what that's referring to there. The Exodus generation. The Exodus generation at Kadesh Barnea, whenever they brought back a bad report, they died in the wilderness physically, except for certain ones, Joshua and Caleb, and certain people over the age of that were over the age of 20. Numbers 15, key passage for understanding this, relates to physical death. Okay, for capital punishment. And then 70 AD, which is about 4 years from the time this is written, possibly, where over 1 million Jews died, could be the backdrop. So this could be a warning for this, and we're going to deal with some resources concerning that. Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 refers back to Kadesh Barnea, which is what's discussed in Numbers 13 and 14. So it shouldn't be surprising that in Hebrews 10, Numbers 15 comes in view with the sin and willfully passage. So this refers to sins deserving capital punishment or perhaps excommunication. So again, Hebrews 10 referring to physical death and loss of blessing inheritance. As I said, the support for the idea that 70 AD, where 100 million Jews died, can be seen from Josephus, Hegesippus, Eusebius. I'm not sure I spelled those right. As I mentioned before, this guy who doesn't believe in eternal security did a wonderful job on this video, and as I wish Daniel Mira would watch it, he would understand some of these contextual considerations. So yeah, that's what we just talked about. So this is where I'm going to interact a little bit with the passage, narrow it down. Now I know it's not going to be the only passage he mentions in his open statement, so just keep that in mind, is that you'll hear content here that you won't necessarily hear in the debate. So this is an exhortation passage, and one possibility is that when it says all the more as you share the day approaching near, one possibility is that this is related to 70 AD temporal judgment, and it could be related to the judgment seat of Christ and possibly in the future, whatever. But it's possible that that idea is introduced as early as there. Now the sin and willfully passage that we're dealing with, Daniel Mira likes to see that when he sees the word fire, that he automatically assumes it has to do with hell, even though this is from an Old Testament passage, and all of that. But it's possible the judgment is 70 AD. So in 1028, it's talking about how a person who didn't listen to the law of Moses physically died, right? It's how much severe punishment. So I still think physical death is in view, or loss of reward, severe punishment, because the difference is the differences in covenants, and loss of eternal reward is greater than loss of physical death. See, Moses physically died, but he didn't lose his eternal inheritance. We know that the Lord is going to reward Moses in various ways. I mean, he involved him in the transfiguration for one, but so I think that's what this is referring to here. I just saw an allusion to the abomination and desolation language here, trample underfoot. But anyway, that's just a thought at observation level. Notice in Daniel 10:35, and I'll probably will discuss the verses in between so no one says I left anything out. The exhortation is therefore based on what's just said, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. So this is the idea of eternal reward. And then for you have need of inheritance, so that when you've done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. And in your mind, if it just helps you see the connection, just add the word land there, because that's what the inheritance, the blessing, was associated on a physical level. And I do think millennial blessing is involved here as too, because even though we're talking about spiritual blessing, that in the millennial kingdom, ruling and reigning will also include those things as well. So this is where we're going to the Old Testament, Numbers 14, where it's talking about someone sinning unintentionally or not presumptuously, some translations will say. And so you see here that there's a sacrifice that you could offer in the situation for that. And it was about temporal forgiveness. These passages are not about how to get saved from hell or something like that. It's talking about temporal forgiveness for people that are already saved. Then it mentions someone sinning defiantly, or some translations say presumptuously. This is the sin of the high hand idea. And so what you have a distinction is between sins that don't result in capital punishment, where there is a sacrifice that could be done for, and then those that result in capital punishment, physical death. And so there's no sacrifice for that temporal forgiveness. The problem is when people think that no sacrifice means that you can't stay saved, in the sense of spiritual salvation, and they're missing the whole entire analogy. Hebrews 10 is not even focusing on positional salvation in that sense. Okay, so swinging back to Hebrews 6, there's some language here that kind of relates to what we're dealing with in Hebrews 10. So the danger of them falling away, it's impossible to renew them again to repentance. In other words, for temporal capital crimes, there's no sacrifice, no way to rectify the situation. Just like Hebrews 10, Hebrews 6 is not focusing on that. Kadesh Barnea is key for understanding this passage as well. So there, once again, I've talked about this chart in a previous a previous video. So we'll go over that, talked about that as well. Now, this is actually the quote from Josephus, and I'll just quickly read the highlighted part. I should therefore speak my mind here at once briefly, that neither did any other city ever suffer such miseries, nor did any age ever breed a generation more fruitful in wickedness than this was for the beginning of the world. Now, listen to this, because if he assumes that fire is hell, then how do you account for this? You know, that it is at least a possibility that they'd almost draw the fire upon the temple, which they seem to think came too slowly. And indeed, when they saw the temple burning from the other city, they were neither troubled by it, nor did they shed any tears on account, while yet their passions were discovered among the Romans themselves. So this is talking about the fiery destruction of the temple and all that. So the soldiers, out of the wrath and hatred they bore the Jews, nailed those they caught, one after one way and another after another, to the crosses by way of jest. But their multitude so grew, the room was wanting for crosses. In other words, they crucified so many people that they didn't have enough room. They didn't have enough crosses, basically. When the war which the Jews made the Romans had been the greatest of all those, none of those have been in our times. Again, emphasizing that language. According, it appears to me the misfortunes of men from the beginning of the world, if they be compared to those of the Jews, are not so considerable as they were, while the author of them were not foreigners either. Okay, so this is Lexham Bible Dictionary. I was researching Hegesippus, and some people argue about, you know, whether he's legitimate or if it's a pen name or what's going on there. But the thing is that Eusebius quotes him. And here's Eusebius. I don't know if this is the Protestant version or if this is the Catholic version. Like I said, I have all that stuff in my library, but this is the one that came up whenever I linked it. So this is what Eusebius says. But the people of the Church of Jerusalem were commanded by an oracle given by revelation before the war esteemed men there to depart from the city and to inhabit the city of Perea, which they called Pella. So according to this passage, there was a warning that was given that possibly some of this could relate to Jesus' statements in Matthew 24. I understand some could take it that way, and others, this could be related to Hebrews. But this is the point. Those who believed in Christ migrated to this city from Jerusalem, that when holy men had entirely abandoned the royal capital of the Jews and the entire land of Judea, the judgment of God might soon overtake them for the many crimes against Christ and his apostles, and utterly destroy the generation of the wicked from among men. Whoever wishes, one can gather accurately from the history written by Josephus. So he's saying you can check Josephus. So then he mentions right here at the temple of God, celebrated of old, which suffered complete destruction and total disappearance in flames. And so he's talking about that. And then it says, but at Passover, there was a number of 3 million were shut off in Jerusalem. So the fact, it could have been worse. I guess that's what he's saying. So he's basically saying, I'm passing over these. I'm not going to all the details. I'm just reminding you basically that that they may know in part how the vengeance of God followed after them for their lawlessness against Christ God. Regardless of Eusebius's motives for doing that, it kind of just shows you the historical stuff related to that. Okay, this passage on the 4 views of the warning passage, I give a few quotes here. This is quoting Josephus. If they failed to heed the warning, history testifies the severity of the physical punishment. Dr. Fruitbaum, who is a Jewish Christian, he talks about it in his commentary here. From Josephus, Hegesippus, and Eusebius, we know about this. And when these Jewish believers received this letter, they read it and they obeyed. They made their break. This is what he's saying at the end of his commentary in Hebrews. They made their break with Judaism once and for all complete. Within the 2-year period of time after the letter was written, the first Jewish revolt broke out in AD 66. At that point, the entire community of Jewish believers, numbering tens of thousands strong, over 20,000 alone lived in Jerusalem at that time, left the country, crossed the Jordan River at the east bank, and went up to the city of Pella. Pella is located on the eastern side of the Jordan River, south of the Sea of Galilee, and inside the war zone. It was a Greek city, one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis, and there they waited out the war. 4 years later, the war ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, as Jesus had predicted. A total of 1 million Jews were killed in the Roman conflict. These writers indicate that not a single Jewish believer lost his life in the conflict because of their obedience to the letter of the Hebrews. Thus, this book had a happy ending. So that's what he's saying, that they actually listened to it. And the rest I've kind of talked about, and I'll be developing more. But anyway, if that was beneficial to you, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell if you want notification. Give us a thumbs up. Share this with others. If you've been blessed by the ministry and feel led by God, you can donate based on the PayPal link that's at the bottom. And most of all, keep this ministry in prayer. God bless.